purchase the used bourbon barrels.
The casks that they use are made out of that beautiful American white oak. It's still got enough wood sugars in the white oak to give Scotch both colour and lovely, gentle honey, vanilla-like flavours.
Beyond the barrel, the similarities between American bourbon whiskey and Scotch whiskey come to an end. While corn is the primary grain in bourbon, Scotch distillers use only 100% barley.
Everyone in Scotland would probably deny it, but it's believed that distilling came to Scotland from the Irish, and it's believed the monks would have brought across the secrets of distilling to Scotland.
Legally, Scotch is produced only in Scotland. If the Scotch is made from pure malted barley at a single distillery, it's known as single malt Scotch.
I have a smoky peaty one here because they come in all different styles, and this one is heavy, smoky, and peaty the way the Scots like it. And I would suggest that you drink it neat. But a good master distiller will tell you that if you put a few drops of water, that water will open up the aromas and the secrets that are locked inside of your Scotch.
On Islay, a remote island on Scotland's west coast, the whiskies have the smokiest flavor in all of Scotland. For nearly 2 centuries, Islay's Laphroaig distillery has achieved its trademark smokiness through a tradition known as barley floor malting.
Well, there are 3 raw materials made in making whiskey, and barley is the first one of them. We need barley, we need water, and we need yeast. Without barley, we would have no material that we could use to extract the sugar that we're then going to ferment.
Malting is the process of forcing barley to germinate. Laphroaig is one of a handful of single malt distillers that performs floor malting on premise. When the barley arrives, it's first steeped in water to a moisture content of 45%. Approximately 6 tons of the grain is then spread onto the malting floor to begin drying.
We're actually trying to trick the barley grain into thinking it's spring and it's time to germinate and grow into a new barley plant. It's developing enzymes, and these enzymes we can use later on in the process. They will break down all the starch, which is the food store of the grain.
After germination, the barley is introduced to its famous companion, peat. Peat is a fuel source formed by decaying plant matter. It remains the primary flavor catalyst in single malt Scotch.
So when you dig it and dry it out, you've got something that's almost like stone that burns with a lovely fragrance and with some heat.
The barley is spread evenly on the floor of a kiln. The peat fire smokes the barley for flavor, and in the process stops the germination.
All that smoke will be drawn slowly up through the bed of grain, but as the smoke is actually rising through the bed of the grain is absorbing that smoky character, and that ultimately makes the character of Laphroaig.
When the malted barley is finally smoked and dried, it's ground and introduced to Scotch whiskey's other crucial ingredient.
The water is so important, it almost defines the flavour that is possible to create in a distillery. It's not the only factor, but if you don't have the right quality of water, no matter what size of still or what apparatus you set up here, you won't get a good whiskey.
The local water is the reason many distilleries in Scotland have been at the same location for generations. By combining the perfect water source with the perfect pot still, a unique whiskey emerges.
Every distillery has their own particular design of still. Ours here, they're very small in comparison to some you'll see, very squat.
In the Scottish Highlands region on the famous River Spey, the Tormore distillery uses a different strategy. Very large stills.
In practice, we know after 200 or 300 years of trial and error, if we put small stills on certain locations, we get wonderful whiskies. But in other locations, it's the big stills that work best.
To further refine the spirit, a unique purifier is positioned at the top of the Tormore stills.
It actually helps to stop any of the rougher spirit elements from going through to the condenser. It's like a filter in a way. It's actually very good, but it adds body and character to the spirit that we have here at Tormore.
Deeper into the Speyside farmlands, Glendronach is the only distillery in Scotland that clings to an ancient still technology. While others heat the stills by piping in hot steam, Glendronach practices direct firing with coal.
It produces particular compounds within the whisky as it's being distilled that aren't produced when the heat is generated within the still from a steam coil or some other means.
While the shape of the still and the heat source have influence, barrel aging is what defines the flavor of single malt Scotch. And in Scotland, it's a long wait. Single malts are routinely aged for 12, 15, and sometimes even 30 and 40 years. As the barrels age, they absorb the character of the air and the land around them. In exchange, the whiskey barrel gives something back. It's called the angel share.
In the cask, we are losing 2% of the alcohol per year. 2% of the volume disappears. So what is happening as the whiskey evaporates is the volume inside the cask goes down and the angels get their reward.
The worldwide sales of single malt are exploding, but it remains only a fraction of the world's supply of Scotch whiskey. Most Scotch is blended.